welcome to my latest edition of Silicon Grapevine. Today I've got a very special guest, Aart de Gues, who's executive chairman and founder of Synopsys. Aart, hello.
Hello, Nitin. Pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on. And I think this is a very special moment for you because you've been awarded the Robert Noyce Award from SIA for 2024. Tell me a little bit about that and how it feels.
Well, it's always weird to get an award because one is so conscious that everything one has done is being surrounded by fantastic people, right? And so I understand why the award has to go to one person, but at the same time, it's always for a team. But this award was special in a different way, partially because, as you know, as of January 1st, I've transitioned the CEO job to Sassine Ghazi, which is a fantastic choice. And at the same time, I have embraced a new quest. And, in the acceptance speech, aside of all the thank yous that are really heartfelt and there's never enough of them, I tried to explain a little bit what that quest was and why I feel like 16 years old again, learning, having aspirations and thoughts for the future, and finding something that's very meaningful. And, in a nutshell, the quest is I'm trying to understand the systemic complexity of the intersection between energy and climate. And just all of those words are big words. So we can go into it if you like at some point in time.
Yeah, no, we will touch on that I think a little bit later. But if anybody reads anything about you, they'll see lots and lots of accolades. Like the most important man in the silicon industry. You've been there since almost the beginning, doing what you do. But that takes a lot of effort, I think, at the beginning. And what inspired you to even consider electronics in the first place? I mean, take us back to your childhood.
Well, if I look at the essence of the childhood, it's not been so much electronics as more the sheer joy of building stuff together with others. And both are equally important. I like the building, making something better, growing it, evolving it, and so on. But all the joy comes out of doing it together with friends. And, maybe one kid characteristic, and you know how it is, at least the feeling was we used to have the infinite long summer vacations, right? And you would sit, I was always outside on the street, sitting there with a bunch of friends. And then you go around, so what we're going to do? I don't know. What we're going to do? Well, I don't know. What am I going to do? And I would be always the person that out of nowhere would start to sense, we're going to, and I didn't know yet what was come out, build a tree cabin. And instantaneously, all kids know what a tree cabin is, except they have all different thoughts about it.
Yes.
But they all know that's going to be exciting. And so then you run home and you steal some stuff from your dad's garage and you find some old piece of carpet and some plastic. And the whole summer project is now not any different than building Synopsys. You're on a mission. And in that process, the cool thing is whenever multiple people find something that they do together, and at the end you sit in this little cramped thing in the tree, and you're kings of the hill.
Yeah. Was there somebody in the family who was studying in something like this, or what in the sort of electrical, electronics, mechanical, whatever?
The only thing I remember there was sort of somebody we called uncle, but he was really slightly more distant, and he worked at the Swiss CERN, which was the Center of Nuclear Research in Geneva.
Correct. Yes.
And for whatever reason, at some point in time, he gave me a little box with three resistors, a capacitor, clearly a reject from something. And as a 7-year-old, that was essentially the first connection. And then for whatever reason, I got, as a birthday gift or so, a little cardboard box, which is how you can put together a radio without a battery and still hear something quite amazing, actually. And so just gluing it together, following the instructions, there was no insight on how it worked. But there was also an understanding if you didn't do it right, it would certainly not work. And so those are the touch points. Electronics things came all by accident. Yes, I studied electrical engineering, But there was another fantastic accidental piece of luck, which is once I finished studies in Switzerland. That's where I mostly grew up, although
EPFL,
I'm
yes,
Dutch.
very famous institute, yes.
And so I decided, well, I'm not sure what to do. I'm going to go to somewhere else in the world and just continue to study by virtue of not knowing what to do. And so I happened to arrive at a university in Dallas. And literally, the minute I walked into the secretary's office to sign up, some guy walked in who, we talked a little bit, and he changed the name of my advisor to his own name. I had no idea what an advisor was, so it didn't make any difference. He was the new chair of the electrical engineering department. I didn't know what a chair was, so that made no difference. And only years later, I understood who this person was. His name is Ron Rohrer, and he is the father of the program Spice.
Oh, okay, yes, yes. Yeah.
And so suddenly, I was in sort of the next to somebody who today would be viewed as one of the legends in the early years, and only gradually over years I got to understand the gravitas of that, the impact. But when it was time to decide on what the dissertation would be, the PhD dissertation, he had meanwhile already moved away from the university. He was still affiliated as a professor and said, hey, why don't you come a few days, stay at my wife and my place, and then we'll talk about this dissertation. And during that time, I stayed there, I think, 3 months. And he signed me up to join General Electric all at the same time because I could do the dissertation while working there. Turned out I did the dissertation at night, which may not have been the best idea, but it all worked out. But what is relevant in this is that in that process, he connected me with all of his best friends, which turned out to be both the generation before him and parallel to him. And these were, best in class people in the world. And maybe one of the most profound lessons that I now cherish and have learned from that is even if you don't know where you're going to go, what your passion is, and so on, the ability to work with people that are really good, that you trust, that you like, is a fantastic path. And unconscious to me, by introducing me to his friends and the people that had been all these legends in hindsight of creating this field, it set the bar at a certain level.
Very high, yes.
And I think excellence is mostly determined by who you're surrounded with more than anything else. And that, in hindsight, was just a fantastic gift.
That is actually quite I'm not sure if it's a US culture, but I think definitely Silicon Valley culture where you're just surrounded by people who are good at something and then you just get together and put something together.
I think that's a great observation because Silicon Valley is fundamental people that come from all over the world. So it's very broad and diverse is the word I was looking for.
Yes.
But it's also people that master simultaneously this quest for technology and for the economics of technology. And, in the early 2000s, I coined the term for the semiconductor industry that everything we do is techonomics. And I can go deeper into that if you like. But if you miss the technology, obviously you have no economics. But if you can master the economics, obviously you're not going to have some new investment in new technology. And what Silicon Valley has been so great at is to constantly find that balance. And there is critical mass of these type of people here. And not surprisingly, around that is a ring of venture capital that understood this and immediately say, oh, well, here's the place to be if you want to define the future.
Yeah, that's right. So you ended up in the US, you surrounded by amazing people, best in class. And then I guess I think it's all documented, your journey from there. So won't go into that. But when GE and you finished this the CAD division or computer aided engineering division there, that's when you decided with two friends, two colleagues, to start Synopsys or Optimal Solutions. Tell us just the thought process there.
You decided, and decisions too happen often by accident, by luck, or by circumstances. And the circumstance to understand is that GE at that time was in semiconductors but decided to get out of it. We're going to be laid off, and so the decision to do something was a necessity.
Correct.
But there are a couple key decisions, and the first one was that the two other members of my team was, hey, we will think about what can we do with the technology and do it in an ethical fashion, meaning we'll not take or steal anything from GE, but rather see if we can seek their support. And through another set of lucky pieces and good moves, we're able to convince GE to let us go with the technology and some small investment. And ultimately, I think it turned out to be a great decision for GE because they got out altogether, and they got ultimately a great return on some piece of Synopsys. But for us, it was great that it was with the support, the okay of GE that we did this, so unencumbered, and then started the journey of, well, yeah, now build a company. And so it was, again, building something with people that were great to work with. And many trials, many learnings, and somehow the survival instinct brought us here. But also the luck of having exactly the right thing at the right time that ultimately had a massive impact on the history of digital design.
Serendipity plays a big part in this. But what were, I mean, in the early days, I guess the challenges with any startup are sort of, okay, get customers, get revenue, get some ROI for the investors. What were the big challenges in the early days for you in doing that?
Well, for starters, we pretty quickly understood that we had actually a great asset, which was a really good prototype. And so it was not like, okay, here's some slides, we're going to revolutionize the world, give us money. No, it was, we have real results because GE was using the technology. And actually, literally in a matter of weeks, we were able to get the support of another company, Harris Semiconductor, that for whatever reasons knew what we were doing and adopted it. And even before we had full funding, send us a check for $100,000. And it was like, well, for a venture capitalist, you're not talking, just some idea. You're talking something that already somebody is using. And the somebody is using is so important because the speed of development is also very much a function of the speed of the feedback you get. And, it may sound strange, but in many ways, the most painful of our customers still today are our best customers, because you do something great. They say, oh, that's fantastic what you just did. And then 7 minutes later, it's like, but, could you not really? And you get sort of this constant drive that they have applies to ourselves. And so, for our entire existence of Synopsys, I think we've always tried to be very aligned with the people that had the biggest ambitions, the biggest drive, and also, of course, over time, also the biggest economics.
Synopsys, that was 1986, 87, something like that.
Yeah.
And then, so for the last 38 years, I'm not going to ask you to document that, but what would you say were the big landmarks for you, milestones in that journey? Yeah, maybe two or three of the big line milestones.
Yeah, the first real milestone is when you have a customer buying for the second time. It sounds so small, wow. But a lot of people buy some stuff, and then that's the end of the story. And so a repeat customer is the first indication that you have something, and it's also part of this techonomic loop. That wheel starting to churn, right? The notion of scaling the company to actually have customers that are not just the friends you already know, but very rapidly have a professional sales force. Pretty quickly, we went to Europe and then to Asia. The rollout was actually substantially fast, at least for that time. It's not a milestone, it's sort of more a landmark, the fact that at some point in time you go IPO. I don't think it's a milestone because you're essentially on a journey where you have only one goal, which is do things better for the customer for next year. And of course, part of that milestone sequence is driven by what was so well formulated and so active at that time, which was called Moore's Law. And Moore's Law, for me, inculcated the essence of the psychology of our field. An exponential is actually a really demanding thing, right? No matter how you work today, you're already late for tomorrow. Exponentials are mass functions that were born unhappy. They always want more. But I love exponentials because...
Well, it reminds me of the slide rule. The slide rule.
Yes. Well, the slide rule is essentially an exponential that's been pushed in a flat plane, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
But seeing the thing is, it is always amazing how the human cannot really perceive the exponential, because you see a little piece of linear behavior. But the fact that it's... we look back at since Synopsys started at probably 10 million X of productivity. One cannot imagine that, right? One knows it as a very big number, but what it really meant for a field on a worldwide basis for digital design obviously is manifested by its impact. But underneath, it's not one exponential. Moore's Law was sort of the center. It gave the thematic to our field. But it's many joining exponentials of big changes. And so, another breakpoint for us that initially was not heralded as such was the fact that the fastest way of designing a design is by not designing it, but reusing it. And so IP reuse, which today we're by far the broadest distributor of, and ARM is larger, but they focus on the processor mostly, that was a massive parallel path to the whole synthesis, creating and reusing. Well, if you can bring those two together, that is productivity right there. And then around that came in more and more complexity, both going down into all the way to TCAT, which is like atomic level simulation, but also going way up and participating and using all the AI capabilities in the very design. And you see my hands always going like this, because I think silicon is essentially the foundation upon which now AI is being built. And for many years, silicon provided something, and then you would write software on top of it. Now the AI has blossomed on its own, and so it's becoming really demanding and say, hey, where is your next 100x, right?
Yeah.
And that pressure is very legit, because their techonomics are greatly improving if you can do things 10 times faster.
Yeah. Well, I think, was it last Snug or the Snug before, where you presented, and you presented those exponential graphs on how AI is just exploding the sort of design capabilities, and that just sort of brings it home, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's interesting, because one should train oneself to say, the AI exponentials are always exploding, because the difference between going from 1,000 to 2,000 is an explosion. If you're 1,000, right?
Yeah.
If it's from 10 million to 20 million, it's the same explosion.
Yeah.
Same exponential, right? And so I love this notion that we have at least one math function that describe super fast evolutions. And of course, those have existed in history. One of my favorite ones is the printing press, right? By around 1450, and by the year 1500, 20 million books. And that changed the world completely and utterly. And then, of course, the industrial age had the same characteristics, with a few downsides, such as the climate issue. But you see how big these things are, right?
Yeah. I mean, by the way, just in the milestones, I mean, one of mine is was the Arc, building the Arc processor company with the team, and then Synopsys acquiring it at some point later, which is quite an interesting merger of our two paths.
Well, yes, and so there are many of these breakpoints, and actually, one should really align those less with the company and more with the industry, because then you have big impact. And I mentioned a couple of those in the acceptance speech, and one that was very fundamental. If you take 47, the transistor comes about. It is 1960 that simultaneously Kilby and noise invent the integrated circuit.
Yeah.
And why is that so fundamental? Because suddenly things that do something, a transistor, get connected in the same medium, silicon or germanium at that time, and thus create systemic complexity at the next level, right? And then you can go another 15 years or so, and suddenly it's CMOS that changes both the quality of the switching and the power that's not needed to keep it in a certain state. I think that right now we are entering a 20-year massive exponential potential, and that is the notion of multi-die, including the 3D and including unbelievably dense connectivity. Because if you can make between two chips, put hundreds of thousands of connectors per square millimeter, that's a lot of connections, right? That changes architecture completely.
Well, you know what? I mean, just visualizing a city that you sort of visualize a very miniature city with all these stacking, all the skyscrapers and everything else is the 3D stacking.
I love your analogy because I've come to exactly the same, which is you move from little dwellings and suddenly
Yeah,
you're building hotels, right?
exactly. Yeah,
And the interesting thing is there's so many analogies between the two, because when you think about a 50-story hotel,
yeah,
how do they manage to get the same level temperature hot water on the 48th floor
yeah,
in the far
exactly.
corner?
Yeah,
And some hotels don't manage that, actually. Or how many elevators do you put in there? Now
yeah,
we're not putting 8 elevators, right? We're putting hundreds of thousands of elevators,
exactly, exactly.
and we don't have 4,000 rooms like we have 40 million rooms, and
So,
uh, but
sorry, carry on.
I love the fact that Manhattan, right? It is also the orthogonal layout that we
Yeah.
got ever since Meet Conway, and
Mm.
now we're doing the third dimension to that, and now you have New York in profile.
Exactly. So some of the things I think you already mentioned it being surrounded by good people, but are there sort of people that you think really influenced you? I think you mentioned one, professor, but through the journey, are there sort of business mentors, or are there people that you think you learned from quite a bit in this journey?
Yes, and of course some of those were at Synopsys,
Mm,
and there are maybe two that stand out. One is that in the early years of the company, actually he joined towards the end of the first year, Harvey Jones, who came from Daisy
mm,
Systems, I think it was called, and he brought the whole commercial side, the sales, the marketing, and the business sense. And it's over the years that I've learned to appreciate more and more and more how much I learned from him.
mm,
And then a number of years later, early 90s, Chi-Foon Chan, who joined from NEC, essentially immediately started to scale something that we actually were good at initially, which is building trust relationship with customers. But then doing that at a worldwide sustainable fashion is a substantial task. And he and I worked very, very closely to build the heart and soul of the company, all the way to being a number of years co-CEO of the company. And a big piece of my DNA is actually I've gotten from him. So these are people that I work
mm,
with very closely. I like to also, see that on the outside there were people that were role
mm,
models in completely different areas, and so two people I always like to highlight was the person who was heading the Human Rights Watch,
mm,
because through the various opportunities as a CEO, you get to know people in other circles. Suddenly, you discover people that have courage, and that deal with very different league of gravitas issues in the world. Same with the leader of Environmental Defense Fund. Uh, and these are people that already have put their life at the service of how do they improve things in a broader way. And so often, when you have the opportunity to, even if it's just half an hour, sit next to somebody like that, uh, it's always interesting to ask people that have done something great to say, if there's one thing I should know that you have learned, what is it? And they often are, nobody's prepared for that type of a question, and it makes it immediately an insightful discussion because they're thinking, yeah, so what would it actually be? And so I love to be 16-year old again all the time, because you're still open to everything. You may be naive, but the learning is always a gift. And
It's actually good because my first job I was at National Semiconductor, and as a technical support engineer, and one of the FAEs, Ben Mullet, always used to say to me, "Keep asking questions, young son, because it'll make you go fast." That sort of curiosity, child curiosity, and that's kind of
well,
why
you clearly have kept that.
Yeah, maybe that's why it's maintain myself as a journalist or whatever. So yes, I think keeping that 16-year-old. We're going to talk a little bit about what excites you and some of the climate change stuff in a minute. But let's go to something else, which is your passion. And I think people in the industry will remember your getting up on stage at DAC in 2000 and performing. So I think, was it New Orleans or LA? I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. I vaguely remember that speech.
Yeah.
This was the system on a ship. Chip analogy, right?
Yeah. But no, so I was actually talking about music, your passion for music. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think that sort of is a big part of your life.
Yeah, somewhat by accident as a kid, at some point in time, I got a guitar, and then it didn't take all that long before in the apartment complex that we lived in, there would be a little band, and building a band is not that different than building the cabin in the tree or the little race car thing that you slap together. It changes instantaneously when two people start playing something together. And now, many years later, I would say the moment it becomes multiplicative is when something happens, because you play your instrument, somebody else, that's sort of additive. And especially if you don't listen at all, you will have completely different things.
Yeah.
The minute you start listening, you suddenly start to respond to each other or support each other, right? And then a good band, of course, does that really, really, really well. And a good company does it really well. And I would argue that a top-notch executive team is not any different than a top-notch improvisational band. And so at that time, I was very interested in jazz and then blues over time. And today I still play in a band. And we do, a dozen gigs per year, and these are, 3-hour gigs, right? So it's not like something you go unprepared to, and it has the same feel when we play well together. When there's that moment, somebody does something and somebody else picks up on it and slightly enhances it or modifies it. The rest of the band goes, "What just happened? What just happened?" Yeah. And out of that little moment of creativity, suddenly there's, for starters, an energy that starts to move.
Yeah.
And now you try to build up on that, right? And there's always this balance between how much is practice needed in order to know what the chord flow is going to be, what the principles are, where we're going to head, when we're going to stop, how to stop, things like that. And the other part, the improvisational part, which is, what are the little sparks that get thrown into this, and when you have a great brainstorm with one's executive team, it's exactly like that. You have to somebody constantly say, "Yeah, but so how much money are we going to make?" Or "Is this doable or not?" And then somebody else that says, "Yeah, but what if we used copper?" And the whole group goes, "Hell no, that's too dangerous." Until somebody says, "Yeah, but yes, if we did this, we could," right? And that is something that is still total joy for me.
Well, I like how you brought in "yes if," because I've read a lot about Synopsys creating that "yes if" rather than "no you can't." But I think it's quite
no because,
no because, yes. So coming back to the band, it's quite interesting. You talk about like just feeding off each other's energy, and it's kind of like a jamming session. But I was going to ask you, so if people want to watch you, where do they go to? What's the name of the band?
Oh, Legally Blue. Legally Blue is the name of the band. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Well, I'm sure people will be Google searching this now.
Yeah.
Coming to music, then I think I can see how you sort of relate to that, and sort of how the analogies between what you're talking about in terms of teams and bands. But let's go to a little bit about what one of the things I like to talk about is what excites you now. And I think it's kind of your passion, and you said in your acceptance speech as well. So it's about energy and climate change. And I think I've actually been having a conversation about this to do a lot more on this in the Times as well. But tell me a little bit about what excites you.
Foundationally, excuse me, it's the same as before. It is understanding, learning, and then seeing what one can build out of that. But it is its own quest, partially because I have an opportunity now to dedicate, hopefully, a next phase of life to something that is, in my opinion, extremely meaningful. And actually, the more I look at it, it is unbelievably urgent, what's needed. But already a number of years ago, I started to build in almost every keynote a little section, 4 or 5 slides on the notion of climate change. And at that time, it came from the angle that if you look at the simulations that started, or I should say the models that gradually became simulation that started in the 70s, it's unbelievably how by the 80s and 90s, the accuracy of the prediction of today's temperature is already there. And so all of this talk about hoax and it doesn't exist, science actually is terrifically good. There's been so much learning in those 40 years. And as I started to see that about 15 years ago, I realized, hey, we need to build that into our consciousness. What has happened recently in the last couple of years is I discovered one graph that really I cannot unsee. And in very simple terms, it's the density of CO2 over the last 1,000 years. And essentially it looks like this, flat, 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 280 ppm, flat, 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 nothing happening. And then you arrive at 1,800 and the thing goes zip way up to 420 today. But the thing that floored me, somewhat by accident, on PowerPoint of all things, I mapped a perfect, mathematically correct exponential on it. And I know exponentials, they are super powerful and super dangerous at the same time. And so that got my full attention. And I have much more to say about that, but that's in the acceptance video. You can find that.
We'll get people to watch that, yes.
Hopefully, yeah. And, that's the weird thing. For me, it's the acceptance, this award, I'm so thankful for because I had an opportunity to talk to 10 minutes to the leaders of the semiconductor industry. All people that understand most of this are very smart and all have no time, right? And so if I can be a little bit of a help in moving the thinking about it forward, the one thing that I'm interested in is, especially at the moment where our industry is saying we're going to use way more energy because our grand mission is now clear. We're going to augment and scale the human brain. What an unbelievable mission, right? Realize the mission of the industrial age was we're going to augment and scale the human muscles. And they did well with that. And many more things, of course, right? Both use energy, and I'm not comparing the levels of energy, but I'm comparing the level of impact give me. And so what is so exciting about this quest is the amount of learning is just crazy. I'm drinking from a fire hose because everything I touch, there are 10 things underneath I really should know. And there's a mere 600 PhDs I need to quickly catch up on. There's no way to do that. But what I can try to do is to say, simplify, simplify, simplify to what are the very basic principles. And one of the principles I like to share with you right now is that, our field, so 77 years since the transistor, right? Let's call it the information age. That's us. And now we're going to go after the brain. Our field has rigorously managed the two-stepper of invent something and then improve it. Invent and improve. And the improving is really a techonomic feature of saying, is the technology working? Can you get money for it? And can you then take the money to do more invention? And we've done that. And so that techonomic loop is actually extremely effective and complete. Looking back on the industrial age, you cannot say that because, yes, you get more energy, you get more standard of living, but the side effect of that CO2 is not in the techonomic loop. There
Okay.
is no
Yeah.
economics. It's put the crap in the air and there's no penalty. There's no cost for that. Now, in all fairness, they didn't know at that time the impact and so on. Now we do. And when you look at these numbers, you'd say we have to move way faster because right now on exponential, and half of the CO2 put in the last 200 years was in the last 40 years.
Yeah,
So
I guess.
that's what's driving my urgency. And we'll see where it goes. But my intent is first understand more before one has too quickly opinions on what to do.
It's a very sort of long discussion if we were to have it, but essentially, is part of it, the energy efficiency drive that we need to make to deliver that, augmenting the human brain.
Yeah, I think there's three things when you talk about energy. The efficiency, of course, is anytime you can do something better with less energy, you have a savings against
Yeah,
the problem. But it's
yeah,
also true that every time you can do something better, instead of doing the savings, you do more of it, right? And so,
exactly.
so
Yeah,
that is the challenge. The second challenge is to say, well, can we change the energy source? And if you look at coal, oil, and gas, they're roughly speaking 3/4 of what we use in the world. So that's a
yes,
lot. And then you have things that are really blossoming, such as the solar and wind, but it's a small percentage. Hydro has been used earlier, and now there's a revitalization of nuclear happening. And
correct.
notice, by the way, that a number of the big hyperscalers have made forward commitments because they see they cannot get the energy they need, and they have strong commitments to wanting to be CO2 free at some point in time. And then the last question is, well, can you invent mechanism to suck the CO2 back out of the air? And yes, they exist, and they're unbelievably expensive. And yes, the price could go down over time as you improve a techonomic loop. You need a
Yeah,
techonomic loop to move things forward.
yeah,
Uh, but the urgency, from my perspective, is given by that one curve, which is the density of CO2.
indeed. One last question before we sort of go to a close, and then I'll ask you my final question, so penultimate. Synopsys has been your baby. So you've grown it, nurtured it with a team. How does it feel to sort of let go and be that sort of um, you're going to be less and less involved? So yeah, I guess do you have that urge to be involved all the time? Or are you happy to let sort of other people deal with it? Now you're a team player, so I guess I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Well, so for starters, it's our baby. It's not my baby. Just because you happen to be there at the beginning, very quickly, the whole family, and there's the Synopsys family, but there's also a big family in the customers, the supporters, the ecosystem suppliers. It's bigger. Secondly, I obviously was intellectually well aware that when you do something very, very intensely for a long, long period of time, and suddenly you say, "Oh, okay, no more," that's a discontinuity that can be challenging. And I've learned over time that many of the challenges are extremely well understood intellectually, and then feeling wise, they overwhelm you for some period of time, and you have to learn a lot of things. And I've always given really good advice to other people: don't go away from something, go towards something. And now I'm moving very fast towards something, but it's also true that when you're fully into it before, you cannot do all of these things and completely prepare for that. So the emotional challenges are there, but these are other forms of learning. And I think I look at the mirror today and 6 months ago and 12 months ago, I am evolving with that, try to do that as fast as possible. But there was one interesting lesson, because it's been humbling many people once the news came out, and so one came to say thanks, came to say nice, really unbelievably nice things, and I almost don't want to talk about it because it feels, it's humbling to get that.
Yes.
But at the same time, I felt often quite depressed about it. And I
Oh,
realized one day why. Because everything was in past tense voice. Everything was
mm,
you did, you were, and so on. And there was very little about, and you're gonna be, or you're gonna do, except a few that said, oh, yeah, are you gonna play golf now? And no way. Well, nothing against golf, but it's not me.
yeah,
And learning that the gratitude for all of that, I need to at the same time understand that for myself, looking in the backward mirror is not where I want to be. I
mm,
understand that over time in life, there's certain things that will go down, and it's certainly physical abilities or
yeah,
mental abilities can go down. But at the same time, looking at every next day as a gift for learning and trying to do something that maybe in the latter part of life becomes more meaningful is actually what I want to strive towards. Now, nothing is easy in
yeah,
change,
exactly,
but
exactly.
in companies we always say, "Hey, never let a good crisis go unused." Right? Use the crisis to say, "Oh, but that's just the beginning of version n+1 of yourself."
Exactly,
And
exactly.
I think that is true for entire life. It's not different in any age group.
This is your story. I'm not going to tell you, but I have so many parallels, and we'll have another discussion another time
Okay.
on that. But so finally, what would you advise young Art, knowing what you know now? Um, would you have like what would you tell him or even yes,
Well, I used to tell the young arts because over the years I've had a number of
yes,
from mostly high schoolers, not knowing what to do in college and so on, and I always advise them to find your passion for something that you're really excited about because it's self-feeding. And then things don't feel like work. Of course, there's work with it, but it feels like you're on a mission. And I've learned that to be careful with that advice because many
mm,
people don't find their passion. I took it for
yeah,
granted you'll find it, and it's not. And they may find it much later or in a much different direction than they thought. And so I modified my advice to something we actually did speak about. When you don't know right away what your passion is, and actually it's perfectly okay to not have that for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. Uh, Find good people. Find people that stimulate you. Find people where
yes,
you think, I wish I was a little bit like that person. Uh, uh, because that is a little feedback loop towards formulating yourself by virtue of actually role models. And I'm not just looking at sort of this intellectual role model that has all the answers. I'm looking much more at the role model that helps you ask questions of yourself
yes, yes,
and just puts you always a little bit on that edge. But so what would you do? What would you do
yeah,
here? And suddenly you either discover that you have certain passions or you discover that you have certain talents and that nurturing them is good. You also can discover that you have talents and that you should develop some of the opposite talents, so to be more balanced. And often
yeah,
in the first half of life, one tries to become a little more rounded. And the second half of life, you say, well, certain areas I'm just always going to be good, and some areas is not me. Zoom forward. And so that dialectic of always doing this and the opposite, I found to always be great. Think
yeah,
something and think the opposite and go there. And then the third thing, and you mentioned it briefly, is a very fundamental mindset. And there you can decide, and you have to decide over and over again. And it's the mindset between no because and yes if. And the
yes,
because and the if can absolutely be absolutely the same thing. But
mm,
the no closes doors, the yes opens doors. And
yes,
people can say, well, isn't that a little bit the same as Nike, just do it? No, it's not. Just do it is fantastic when you're 13 years old and 16 years old. The yes if takes into account that it may be if. That real things are hard. Real things are hard. And what I've discovered that by explicitly in the vocabulary change your own vocabulary to yes if when you really want to say no because. And as an engineer, we're really good at no because.
Exactly.
Change that vocabulary, that other people will start playing the same vocabulary. And out of nowhere, your if that's almost a no because, somebody else can say, yeah, but we could do this thing. And then that if is not so hard anymore. And group yes if is fantastic. And this came about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. Synopsys was getting a little stodgy, and it unleashed just a whole next phase for the company. And so that mindset, the biggest no becauser is the person you see first moment in the morning in the mirror. There's Mr. or Mrs. no because. And in the mirror you say, no, today we're going to be yes if.
Yeah.
Not always easy, but it's unbelievably high impact.
Very good philosophy. Well, Aart de Gues, thank you very much for your time.
Such a pleasure talking to you, Nitin.
Thank you.
Be well.